Take a look and discuss a very, very important international story. The G7 is warning Russia against an invasion of Ukraine. It follows what has been a military build-up on the border between the two countries. Now, we understand that the G7 is demanding Russia de-escalate its military presence or face severe economic pain, as they put it. Now, just some context, you'll remember that Russia was kicked out of the G8 for its invasion of Crimea. So why are they taking the action that they are now as Russia? Well, let's speak to Dr. Oscar van Heerden, international relations scholar and, of course, Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Fort Hare. Doctor, always such a pleasure to have you on eNCA. We're going to talk about what needs to happen here, G7, Russia, Ukraine. How do we de-escalate this? First, if we could, why is Russia doing this with the Ukraine?
Good morning, Gareth, and good morning to the viewers. Yes, you see, for Russia, as President Putin put it, the buildup of military presence from NATO forces on its western and eastern borders is a red line, particularly Georgia and Ukraine. They see it as a significant security threat to Russia. And they're doing it, Gareth, for two reasons. One, Putin's argument is that if NATO insists that the Ukraine and Georgia, as two countries, must be members of the NATO forces, of the NATO alliance, that will pose a significant threat to the security of Russia, and Russia will not want to allow that. But also, two, there is talk that if the Ukraine indeed does join NATO, there's talk of a missile defense system that the NATO alliance is talking about building in the Ukraine, particularly to be a deterrent for Russian nuclear armaments, and Putin will have none of it.
So how seriously should a threat like the G7 is making against Vladimir Putin, Doctor, how seriously should the Russian president take something like that? How worried, based on his previous history with the G8 and G7, how seriously do you think he'll take a threat like that?
Well, as you know, Gareth, sanctions had been imposed on Russia before by Western powers. The reliance, however, on Russian gas that comes into Germany and into the rest of Europe is a major concern. It is a bargaining chip for the Russian president, because basically, in as much as there's the threat for sanctions against Russia, Russia is saying they can retaliate, they can switch off the gas, which will leave large parts of Europe in the dark because they are reliant on that gas. And so it will be a tit for tat. I don't think that Putin is underplaying the threat of sanctions, but is also not necessarily going to bow to the demands of the Western powers.
How concerned should the Northern Hemisphere, Europe, etc., be concerned about a full-out scale war in a situation like this, Doctor?
Well, the truth is, Gareth, that Russia possesses significant human power on the ground. It has very large military troops in comparison to Europe. A full-scale conflict between the two is something that I don't think anyone wants. It can be quite messy. Russia, unlike the early 90s, is in a much stronger position economically and still has that nuclear deterrent. And so I think that all channels will be exhausted, including, as you see, the talks between Putin and President Biden from the US, trying to de-escalate the crisis, because no one really wants a full-out conflict.
No, of course not. Doctor, in the last 30 seconds I have with you, let's bring into the conversation, before I say goodbye, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. What's our role in this, if any? How involved should we get, if at all?
Well, as South Africa, as you know, we've just finished our 2-year term on the UN Security Council last year. I think that South Africa, as a partner of Russia, will call for this to be resolved through the UN structures and not necessarily through bilaterals between the US and Russia or Europe. They would want a multi-party approach to resolving this conflict.
Yeah, so you see, also very important for South Africans to understand how we play in all of this. Well, it's always so good to have you with us, Dr. van Heerden, Oscar van Heerden, international relations scholar and also Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Fort Hare. Always able to put into such simple terms for someone like me, Toombs, why a story like that is so very important to us here in South Africa as well.
Indeed.